When you think of the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, your mind instantly fills with the deafening roar of bolter fire, the revving of Astarte's chainswords, and the earth-shattering screams of an alien swarm. But consider this. What if the most terrifying battlefield in the galaxy is completely silent? Imagine being stationed millions of miles from the nearest habitable world, floating in a starless void where the loudest sound is the frantic rhythm of your own heartbeat. We know that in the far future, there is only war. Yet, there are obscure, forgotten places where this war is not fought with macro cannons or laser batteries, but with the fragile architecture of the human mind. Far beyond the vibrant, overcrowded hive cities and the blood-soaked trenches of the Imperial Guard, suspended in the absolute freezing expanse of the galactic fringe, exist the Imperial Void Stations. Here, the true enemy is isolation a-creeping, insidious madness. If you find yourself captivated by the darker, more psychological and unexplored corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, you are exactly where you need to be. Before we decode the chilling, claustrophobic reality of an Imperial system monitor, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We plunge into the deep and told lore of the Grimdark galaxy every single week. Now, secure your atmospheric helmet, take a deep breath, and prepare to stare directly into the abyss. You are a Void Watchman. You are a solitary sentinel, trapped inside a decaying, adamantium tin can, suspended precariously over the infinite drop of real space. Your only physical company is the incessant groaning of the station's pressurized hull and the flickering, sickly amber lights of ancient, failing cogitators. It is a horrifying life of absolute sensory deprivation, where the human mind, desperate for any form of stimulation, inevitably begins to manufacture its own personalized nightmares from the shadows. And the most terrifying part, just beyond those reinforced macro-glass viewing ports, something infinitely worse than empty space is waiting. The wall. The chaotic sea of souls is always pressing against the thin, fragile veil of reality, whispering dark promises and unspeakable horrors to those who are left completely alone in the dark. Welcome to the suffocating, mind-shattering existence of an Imperial Void Station Watchman. To understand the true horror of this isolation, you must first understand the environment. An Imperial Void Station is not a shining bastion of humanity's glory, nor is it a heavily armed fortress bristling with macro cannons and heroic defenders. It is, for all intents and purposes, a suspended tomb. These stations are ancient, modular constructs of rusted adamantium and plasteel, hastily assembled millennia ago and largely forgotten by the wider Imperium. Now imagine the physical sensation of living inside one. The temperature is kept at a perpetual, biting chill to conserve plasma energy, leaving a constant frost on the interior bulkheads. The air you breathe is strictly recycled, tasting heavily of metallic copper, ozone, and centuries of stale human sweat. It is a suffocating atmosphere, one that constantly reminds you that you are entirely dependent on failing archaic machinery to simply take your next breath. The architectural layout is designed for utility, completely devoid of comfort. You navigate through narrow, low-ceilinged corridors where exposed cabling hangs like the severed veins of a dying beast. Your living quarters are barely larger than a standard Munitorum coffin. Yet, this claustrophobic internal reality is violently contrasted by the viewing ports. Through those thick panes of armor glass, you are forced to confront the staggering, infinite emptiness of the galactic void. The acoustic environment of a deep space station is perhaps its most psychologically damaging feature. There is no weather, no wildlife, no hum of a bustling city. There is only the rhythmic, agonizing groan of the station superstructure resisting the vacuum of space. Every sudden creak of metal sounds like a structural failure. Every hiss of a pneumatic valve sounds like a dying breath. Eventually, the silence between these mechanical noises becomes completely deafening, Consider this. What is the actual purpose of this suspended coffin? Most of these outposts serve as astropathic relay boosters or early warning auger rays on the absolute fringes of Imperial space. They are the tripwires of the Imperium. As a watchman, your sole duty is to monitor flickering green runes on a picked screen, watching for any localized disruptions in real space. You are not a warrior. You are merely an observer waiting for a disaster. You are stationed light years away from any significant fleet deployment or planetary defense force. If the augurs detect a pirate raid, a Drukari slaving vessel, or a vanguard organism of a Tyranid high fleet, your distress signal will take weeks to reach the nearest administratum hub. By the time a response is even authorized, you will have been dead for months. You are entirely expendable. A tiny solitary cog left to rust in the absolute dark. This realization of total insignificance is the first crack in the human psyche. When you know that no one is coming to save you, the walls of the station begin to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. And as the weeks bleed into months, and the months into years, that unbearable, crushing isolation primes the mind for something far worse. Because out here, on the very edge of reality, you are never truly alone. The human brain is an incredibly complex biological cogitator, hardwired over millions of years of terrestrial evolution to process a constant stream of sensory input. Sunlight, wind, the ambient noise of a bustling settlement. The presence of other living beings, these are the anchors that keep our sanity tethered to reality. Now imagine stripping all of that away in the sterile and changing environment of an Imperial Void Station. You are subjected to the ultimate form of sensory deprivation. This is the breeding ground for a condition known in the darker annals of the administratum as void madness. Consider this. How do you measure the passage of time when there is no sun to rise or set? The station's chronometers tick away with relentless, mechanical precision. But your biological clock begins to violently desynchronize. The artificial lumen strips overhead maintain a static, sickly amber glow, offering no diurnal cycle. Days blur into weeks, and weeks bleed into an amorphous, unending present. You wake up exhausted. You work in a state of lethargy, and you lie awake during rest cycles, staring at the riveted ceiling, desperately trying to remember what natural daylight feels like. The silence of deep space is not merely empty. It is a vacuum that aggressively demands to be filled. When the auditory cortex is starved of external stimuli, it begins to artificially amplify the internal. At first, you become acutely aware of your own bodily functions. The rhythmic thump of your pulse in your ears becomes as loud as a macrocannon firing. You hear the digestion of your corpse starch rations, the creaking of your joints, the rush of blood through your veins. You become a prisoner trapped within the noisy, claustrophobic shell of your own flesh. But what if the sounds are not coming from inside you? The station itself is a dying beast of ancient machinery, constantly groaning, hissing and settling. The human mind, desperate to find patterns where none exist, engages in a terrifying form of audio pareidolia, that hiss of a failing pneumatic seal. It begins to sound suspiciously like an exhausted sigh, the rhythmic thumping of the primary life support pump. It mimics the heavy, deliberate footsteps of someone or something walking down the adjacent, supposedly empty corridor. You find yourself holding your breath, waiting for a knock on your bulkhead door. This desperate pattern recognition extends to your visual cortex as well. As you stare out through the macro-glass viewing ports, the infinite blackness of real space ceases to be a blank canvas. You're exhausted. Overstimulated eyes begin to perceive movement in the absolute dark. A flicker of distant starlight is misinterpreted as the thrust flare of an approaching stealth vessel. The shadow cast by an external comms ray morphs into the silhouette of a colossal, predatory leviathan drifting just beyond the sensor range. You are constantly on edge, fighting phantom threats that exist solely in your degrading mind. Yet, these mundane psychological phenomena are merely the prelude to the true horror of a Void Watchman's existence. You are stationed on the fringe, where the barrier between the material universe and the Imperium is notoriously thin. The warp, the Sea of Souls, is not just an alternate dimension used for faster-than-light travel. It is a roiling, sentient ocean of raw emotion and predatory malice, and it hates you. It hates your physical existence, your fragile sanity, and your utter isolation. Without the overwhelming psychic static generated by a populous hive world to mask your presence, your isolated consciousness shined like a solitary candle in a pitch-black forest. You are a beacon for the entities that dwell in the warp. It begins subtly. You start to hear whispers just below the threshold of conscious hearing, voices that sound eerily familiar. They mimic the tones of long-dead relatives, former comrades, or even your own voice, echoing your deepest insecurities and darkest regrets right into your mind. You might assume the station's static Geller field protects you, but these ancient, stationary generators are notorious for their microscopic fluctuations. They do not fail completely, but they stutter. In those fractions of a second when the field wavers, the raw stuff of the Imperium bleeds into your pressurized reality. The temperature drops drastically. The shadows in the corner of your quarters seem to elongate and detach from their casters. The metallic tang of recycled air is momentarily replaced by the sickly sweet stench of ozone, rotting meat, and dried blood. Sleep offers absolutely no refuge. In fact, it is when you are most vulnerable. Void madness manifests fiercely in your dreams, which are no longer mere reflections of your subconscious, but corrupted visions injected by warp predators. You dream of the void outside shattering like glass, of being pulled out into the cold, screaming vacuum, while demonic faces laugh from the stars. You jolt awake, drenched in cold sweat, your heart hammering against your ribs, only to find the waking world just as terrifying as the nightmare you just escaped. As the isolation stretches on, the boundary between these night terrors and reality begins to permanently dissolve. This is the critical threshold of the psychological toll. You start to question the basic laws of physics. Did that heavy spanner you placed on the auger console just move on its own? Did the reflection in the polished cogitator screen blink when you didn't? You find yourself avoiding mirrors and reflective surfaces entirely, terrified that the face looking back at you might not be your own anymore. This unrelenting mental torment exacts a severe physical price. Chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, degrading your immune system and your cognitive functions. Your hands develop a permanent, uncontrollable tremor. Your eyes become bloodshot and sunken, rimmed with the deep, dark circles of profound sleep deprivation. You lose your appetite, surviving only on the bare minimum of recycled water and tasteless nutrient paste. Your body slowly cannibalizing its own muscle mass. You are wasting away, becoming a living ghost haunting your own station. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this descent into madness is the gradual corruption of your own memories. The warp feeds hungrily on nostalgia and regret. The faces of your loved ones, the reasons you accepted this miserable post, the very tenets of your faith in the God Emperor, they all begin to twist and warp. You start to remember horrific sins you never committed and tragedies that never occurred. The Imperium is actively rewriting your internal history, gaslighting you into a state of absolute, crushing despair. Consider the agonizing weight of this existence. You are trapped in a freezing metal box, surrounded by an infinite abyss, hunted by your own degrading mind, and stalked by extra-dimensional horrors. It is here that the true danger of the void presents itself. It is not an alien boarding party or a catastrophic plasma failure. It is the sudden, overwhelming, and terrifyingly logical urge to simply open the external airlock, to step out into the quiet, to let the freezing vacuum embrace you and end the relentless whispering once and for all. But even that escape is a cruel illusion. In the grim darkness of the Warhammer 40K universe, suicide in the presence of a thinning warp veil does not guarantee oblivion. It merely surrenders your unprotected soul directly to the waiting jaws of the demons that have been slowly driving you mad. You are caught in the ultimate, inescapable trap. To live is to endure a tortuous, slow-motion shattering of your sanity. To die is to forfeit your soul to eternal torment. There is no victory. There is only the long, cold watch in the dark. To truly grasp the horrors of void madness, let us examine the classified administratum logs regarding Station Omicron 7, suspended in the freezing, lightless expanse of the Halo Zone. This early warning auger ray was manned by a single Imperial citizen, Watchman Elias Thorne. For the first 2 standard years of his deployment, Thorne's vitals and routine telemetry reports indicated a model servant of the Imperium. He survived by anchoring his fragile mind to an obsessive and yielding daily schedule. Every waking cycle, Elias performed the exact same rituals. He checked the primary plasma relays, scrubbed the frost from the internal bulkheads, and recited the litanies of the Emperor's Light. This strict adherence to protocol was his armor against the creeping dread of the abyss. He believed that as long as he maintained the station would maintain him. But routine is merely a temporary bandage on a psychological wound that the void constantly tears open. The fracture in his sanity did not happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing splinter. In the 7th month of his 3rd year, the absolute silence of Omicron 7 was finally broken. It did not begin with the blare of a proximity klaxon or the shudder of a physical impact. It started with a faint, repeating whisper bleeding through the station's primary voxcaster. At first, Elias dismissed it as background cosmic radiation, a common anomaly on the fringe. But the static slowly coalesced into a desperate, human voice. It was a distress signal. The transmission identified itself as the St. Drusus, an Imperial mass conveyor claiming catastrophic Gala field failure and begging for immediate astropathic relay. For Elias, this was a sudden, blinding flash of purpose. After years of isolation, he was no longer useless. He frantically initiated the response protocols, desperate to make contact, desperate to hear another living soul. Consider the sheer, crushing terror of what happened next. Following standard Munitorum procedure, Elias cross-referenced the ship's identification code with the station's ancient database to verify the vessel's registry. The cogitator spat out a harsh, green truth that froze the blood in his veins. The St. Drusus was not a ship currently in distress. According to the archive, that vessel had been swallowed by a warp storm and lost with all hands exactly 300 years ago. Before we witness the horrifying conclusion of Elias Thorne's watch, take a moment to ensure you are subscribed to the channel. If you find yourself drawn to the grim, psychological depths of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, hitting the like button and turning on notifications allows us to continue unearthing these dark, forgotten archives. Your support keeps the channel alive. Now, let us return to the freezing dark of Omicron 7, where the past is refusing to stay dead. The moment Elias read that chronometric data, the voice on the voxcaster fundamentally changed. The frantic, static-laced plea for help abruptly ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the command deck, followed by a low, wet chuckle that resonated through the ship's speakers. The voice was no longer broadcasting a general distress call. It began speaking directly to Elias, using his full name, and whispering secrets about his childhood that no one else could possibly know. The final transmission log from Omicron 7 is not a warning of an alien fleet, but the sound of a man completely shattered by the void. Elias realizes, with a whimpering finality, that the voice mocking him is not coming from the Vox-ray at all. The audio feed is dead. The whispers, he reports in his final, frantic data burst, are vibrating through the armor glass viewing port. Something is floating in the hard vacuum outside, scratching against the window, begging him to open the airlock. At this point, a horrifying question naturally rises. Why would anyone willingly accept such a doomed assignment? In a galaxy utterly consumed by endless war, the promise of a quiet, isolated posting away from the blood-soaked front line sounds like a rare blessing. The Munitorum recruiters are experts at deception. They frame the life of a Void Watchman as a sacred, peaceful duty, a chance to serve the God Emperor in quiet contemplation, safe from the horrors of tyrannid swarms and orc wars. You are told that staggering distance is your ultimate armor. You are led to believe that being stationed millions of light years away from any active war zone means you're protected. But in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, safety is a carefully constructed, bureaucratic myth. The Imperium does not place you on a remote void station to keep you out of harm's way. They place you there because you are vastly cheaper to manufacture and maintain than a complex, automated cogitate array. Consider the terrifying, cold logistics of the Adeptus Administratum. To the scribes of terror, you are not a human being with a soul, a family, or a future. You are merely a biological component. You are a self-replicating, organic sensor suite that runs efficiently on recycled water and cheap corpse starch instead of rare plasma cells. When your mind inevitably breaks under the crushing weight of the void, it is simply a matter of filing a requisition form for a replacement. You are utterly, profoundly expendable. There is also the pervasive illusion of divine purpose. The ecclesiarchy preaches that suffering in silence is the absolute purest form of devotion. As a watchman, you are meant to believe that you're lonely. Freezing vigil is a glowing ember of faith holding back the dark. But spiritual faith offers very little physical warmth when the station's gala fuel starters and the ambient temperature drops. The Emperor is a rotting corpse on a golden throne 10,000 light years away. He is not listening to your desperate, echoing prayers. Even the core justification of your job being a vital early warning system is a cruel joke. Suppose you somehow survive the psychological torment and actually detect a legitimate threat. What then? You send your frantic astropathic squawk into the unforgiving void. But the Imperial war machine is agonizingly, fatally slow. By the time an administratum clerk on a distant hive world finally processes your distress signal, your station will have already been reduced to floating, irradiated slag. Eventually, the grand illusion completely shatters. You realize that the peace you were promised is actually a sterile sensory prison, and the safety you desperately sought, merely a delayed, isolated death sentence. You have not escaped the eternal war of the 41st millennium. You have simply been deployed to its quietest, most agonizing front. And once that terrible realization permanently takes root in your decaying mind, there is absolutely nowhere left to run. Survival on a deep space outpost is not merely about enduring the psychological weight of the void. It is a brutal, grinding physical routine. To stave off the encroaching madness, you must establish an ironclad set of daily practices. These rituals are your only tether to reality. When the silence of the station threatens to crush you, the monotonous repetition of your assigned duties becomes a desperate, necessary mantra to keep your fracturing mind anchored to the physical world. Consider the sheer bleakness of a watchman's sustenance. There are no fresh rations on the fringe. Your daily intake consists entirely of Munitorum-grade corpse starcher dense, flavorless block of recycled biomatter, heavily fortified with synthetic vitamins. The smell is faintly metallic, reminiscent of dried blood and stale chemicals. Eating is not a pleasure. It is a mechanical chore required to fuel your decaying body. Each bite is a grim reminder of the Imperium's horrifying efficiency. A closed ecosystem where humanity consumes itself to survive the dark. The water you drink is no better. It is aggressively filtered through ancient purifiers that have not been properly sanctified by a tech priest in centuries. It always tastes heavily of copper, and the ozone tang of the plasma core. Every breath you take is similarly recycled, thick with the stale essence of your own sweat and fear. You are perpetually inhaling and ingesting the exhausted remnants of your own existence, trapped in a suffocating loop of consumption and excretion. Your physical labor is equally agonizing. The station is a decaying leviathan, and you are its sole, fragile caretaker. You spend hours meticulously scrubbing frost from the macroglass, greasing rusted pneumatics, and realigning failing auguries. This is not out of a sense of pride, but pure survival. If a single plasma relay overheats or a pressure seal fractures, you will either be incinerated in a microsecond or sucked out into the freezing vacuum. The margin for error is absolute zero. Perhaps the most tragic ritual of your isolated existence involves your only companion. Most stations are equipped with a single, battered monotask servitor, a cybernetic drone lobotomized to perform heavy lifting or hazardous repairs. In your crushing loneliness, you inevitably begin to project a personality onto this horrific flesh metal automaton. You give it a name. You tell it stories about a home world you can barely remember. You crack jokes and wait for a response that will never come. But the servitor is not a friend. It is a walking corpse bound in plastic. When it turns, it's dead, milky eyes toward you, its jaw slacking as a line of drool escapes its ruined lips. The illusion abruptly shatters. Its mechanical grunts and the whirring of its servo motors only emphasize the absolute emptiness of the station. Talking to a lobotomized slave does not alleviate your isolation. It merely provides a horrific mirror reflecting your own gradual descent into mindless compliance. When the physical chores are completed, you turn to the spiritual. You kneel before a tarnished, brass aquila welded to the primary bulkhead, clutching a worn copy of the Imperial Creed. You recite the litanies of protection, your voice hoarse and echoing in the cramped space. But these prayers are not spoken with the booming, confident zeal of an ecclesiarchy priest. They are whispered in desperate, trembling bursts, aimed at a god emperor who feels infinitely far away from this starless abyss. Ultimately, these rituals of sanity are destined to fail. No amount of corpse starch, mechanical maintenance, or whispered prayers can permanently plug the leaks in your mind. The routine simply delays the inevitable. The void is endlessly patient. It watches you perform your pathetic, repetitive tasks, waiting for that single moment of exhaustion when you finally forget the words to your prayer, or you look just a little too long into the darkness outside. That is when the abyss finally breaks you. The inevitable breaking point of a Void Watchman rarely arrives with a dramatic, cinematic explosion. Instead, it happens with a quiet, sickening snap deep within the architecture of the mind. It is that terrifying moment when the rituals of sanity finally collapse and you stop questioning the impossible. You no longer wonder if the scratching at the reinforced armor glass is a hallucination. You simply accept that there is something out there in the freezing dark, and it wants to come inside. When this threshold is crossed, the subtle whispers of the warp cease to be external annoyances. They migrate inward, seamlessly blending with your own internal monologue. The voices of dead crewmates and demonic entities begin to sound suspiciously like reason and logic. They stop threatening you and start offering profound, empathetic solutions to your endless suffering. They remind you of the unbearable cold, the tasteless rations, and the crushing loneliness, promising that all of this pain can be instantly washed away. Now imagine the agonizing illusion of choice that follows. Your shattered psyche desperately searches for an exit strategy from this suspended tube. You might look toward the standard issue last pistol locked in the emergency armory, or your eyes might linger on the heavy, red atmospheric cycling controls of the primary airlock. In your degraded state, ending your own life feels like a triumphant reclamation of control. But in the grim darkness of the galaxy, this is merely a trap carefully laid by the predators of the Imperium. If suicide feels too abrupt, there is always a darker, more insidious surrender. If the God Emperor has truly abandoned you to rot on the edge of the galaxy, perhaps the entities lurking in the abyss can offer a new kind of salvation. It begins with a microscopic concession. You intentionally let the plasma relays run a little too hot. You lower the Geller field output just a fraction of a percent. You invite the chaotic corruption inside, trading your sworn duty for the false promise of companionship. As the psychological dam completely bursts, your physical body simply gives up. The relentless fatigue of years spent fighting the void finally crushes you against the frosted adamantium deck. You lie there, paralyzed by the sheer, unfathomable scale of the universe and your own microscopic insignificance within it. The horrific truth crystallizes in your dying mind. You were never meant to be a heroic sentinel guarding the realm of humanity. You are always just a biological battery, slowly drained to keep a forgotten machine running. Ultimately, the Watchman stops resisting. You stop reciting the litanies, you start eating the corpse starch, and you stop trying to differentiate between reality and the war. You simply close your exhausted eyes and let the creeping madness wash over you like a freezing tide. The agonizing silence of the void is finally broken, replaced entirely by the howling, eternal laughter of the dark gods, echoing endlessly through the empty, rusted corridors of a station that the Imperium forgot centuries ago. The true tragedy of the Void Station Watchman is not merely their inevitable demise, but their absolute erasure from history. When an outpost like Omicron 7 finally goes completely dark, the Imperium does not more. The Adeptus Administratum will simply note a minor, insignificant data discrepancy regarding missing telemetry centuries after the fact. The Watchmen fought the hardest, most agonizing battle in the galaxy, a war against the absolute silence of the abyss and the predatory whispers of the warpand. They fought it entirely alone in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The most horrifying fate is not always found on the bleeding edge of a chainsword or within the agonizing digestion pools of a tyrant's womb. Sometimes, it is simply being forgotten by the species you swore to protect. It is being left to rust in a suspended tomb, staring out into an infinite, starless night, waiting for a rescue that will never arrive, until the void finally stares back and swallows your fragile sanity whole. If you survived this descent into the freezing dark of the galactic fringe, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. What isolated, forgotten aspect of the Warhammer 40,000 universe terrifies you the most? Do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell to join our expanding archive of Grimdark lore. Until next time, remember, the Emperor protects, but out here in the infinite abyss, the Emperor is very, very far away.